I remember watching these SAT videos with over like a million views. Some high school kid gets a 1600 and they come out to give some of the tips from, how they prepared for their exam. But at the same time, they just casually mention, oh yeah, I got a perfect score on my PSAT 9, PSAT 10, every standardized test in existence. I memorized the dictionary to prepare. Oh, you got a good score on your SAT? No kidding. When I started studying for my SAT in 10th grade, I had no clue what I was doing. I was dropping 1,200 bombs on a daily basis. Bro, those 1,600 kids, they don't know what it's like to be a dumbass. I do know. And yet I was still able to get that 1,500 plus, 1,530 plus score on my first try. Here is exactly how I did it. Going from where I started to where I am now, over 400 points increased. You already know all the basic advice on how to prep for the reading and writing sections. I even have videos on my own channel. I'm not gonna give you tips that you've already heard before. Let's talk about how top scorers are able to optimize the scores that they end up getting. How you can take your score right now as a 1,400 or 1,450 score and boost it by over 100 points. We need to start by being real with ourselves. College Board and the way that they score the SAT can be brutal. I remember going into my first SAT, having studied like all the different curves for the different months and having these expectations. All of those were thrown out the window when I got my scores back. I got a 1550. I missed 2 questions in the reading and 3 questions in the writing sections. Now, the way that I used to score my own exams is that I might have given myself a 1560 or 1570 by spotting myself a question here or a question there. When you do that consistently at home, especially when people do it on a much larger scale, let's say you get questions wrong in the math sections, for instance. Let's say you get 2 questions wrong. If you use those online score calculators and they tell you that there's a 4% chance that on that one SAT 4 years ago, they would have given you an 800 still. If you try to convince yourself that that was an 800 performance after making mistakes, you are doing yourself a disservice. Make sure you're calculating your score correctly because that can literally sway where you think you are to where you actually are by 50 or even more points. Here's the easiest way at the top level to calculate your scores. For every question you get wrong, take off at least 10 points. That's it. If you make a question wrong in the math section, 10 points, gone. Reading section, writing section, don't spot yourself these bonus questions and just consider it to be a perfect score or to not have lost points for it. Do this for anything above a 1,400. For anything less than that, just use the online score calculators and try to get your score to above that threshold. The next thing we need to talk about, and this is a big thing, making a careless mistake is one of the worst feelings in testing, period. But when you make a careless mistake, it's obviously not intentional. You didn't mean to make that mistake, it just happened. And so beating yourself up over it or just doing a bunch of like random practice to try to stop making careless mistakes is not going to help the situation. What you need are systems, effective systems, structure that are in place that will minimize the number of careless mistakes that you make and will carry over to the actual exam when you're taking the real SAT. Here's what you're going to do. If you're aiming for a top score on the SAT, you should be getting a perfect score in the math section. It's just how it goes. The math section is the easiest section to optimize. Now, when you're in the process of studying for the math section and you learn all the concepts, there will inevitably reach a time period when you consistently start scoring in the 750 to 790 range. This is the stage that differentiates the average students from the Ivy League students. Your local SAT tutor prep kid is gonna see these scores, right? The near 800, but not actually 800, and just be satisfied with it. Move on to studying for the reading or the writing section. And then when they go on to take the exam, when they get their 760 back and they're sitting in shock, how did I make 4 careless mistakes? It's for one clear reason: you didn't close the gap. Okay, now this sounds cool on paper, but what are the actual systems that you can put into place on test day that are going to work for you? I'm about to put you on, so I want all of you watching this right now to get out your notepad, start taking some notes, all right? This is how you get a 1600. I guarantee that at some point in your SAT prep, someone has told you to mark up your text booklets. But people don't tell you how, so for the overwhelming 90+% of people that I see, they're just underlining random shit, expecting it to do something positive for them. You need to be marking up your test with intention. Here's how you do it. In the math section, I don't care how easy the problem is. You are going to underline every single time the portion of the question that asks you to solve for something. Maybe it's solving for X, maybe it's solving for 4X, maybe they want you to find this many number of marbles. You're gonna underline exactly what they're asking you to do. For the reading section, you can adapt your strategy to what works for you, but I'm gonna tell you what worked for me. Honestly, I'm not really an annotation kind of guy. I used to see the advice online to like read a paragraph and then like write like a 1-sentence summary. All of that just felt like a waste of time, and it just felt like so much effort during the actual exam to do it. I was never able to stick with it, and I never found it actually to have a benefit. However, what I did feel useful was that when I was reading these passages, sometimes, you know how they give you like those old English passages or the history passages, and your brain just shuts off? You literally feel like you're falling asleep like reading it because of how boring the passage is. Those passages always felt like the worst to me. So what I would do is I would take my pencil, and as I felt my mind zoning out, I would just underline the words or just like trace the sections that I was on to keep myself more engaged. Like nowadays we all have the ADHD TikTok brain. Just doing one other little extra thing to help you stay focused can usually be enough to get you to power through reading the passage and actually understanding what's going on. I would also take that one step further. So if I was reading through a passage, kind of using my pencil to keep my eyes going, and I found a sentence that was key to that passage, it was some like pivotal moment, something really important, I would just underline that sentence as I was reading it and then just keep going. The thing is, by the time your entire passage is done, you might have done that maybe 2 or 3 times, a couple key ideas. When it comes time to answering the questions, there is a good chance that either one, you underlined a sentence that's going to be important to answering a question. Maybe they ask you about that sentence, or it has, it's one of those evidence-based questions. You can instantly go back to it because you know where it is in the text. Or if those sentences aren't being used, you have some kind of like visual indicator for where the core ideas happen. And if a question asks you about something in your mind, you can kind of compartmentalize where things are. All of this just saves you time, so you can spend more time, 1, figuring out where the right answers are, and 2, if you know where the answers are probably going to be and you dig through and you're able to find it, well then it's just gonna naturally increase your scores. Just like closing the gap in the math section, it's super important that eventually when you get to those top tier scores, you're able to close the gap in the reading section. I remember studying for my exam, and I'd been going at this for a little bit now, and I do this one reading passage, and I literally get 9 out of the 10 questions wrong. And it's not because I was terrible at the reading section. I actually got most of the questions in all the other passages correct. But this one passage was just this absolutely brutal, like social science history passages. One of those things like from a, George Washington's speech out of the 18th century. You have no clue what they're even saying. Those passages always felt like they were the hardest for me. I've recommended this textbook before from Prep Vantage on my channel, and a lot of you guys have actually gone on to buy the textbook and tell me how useful it was for preparing for your exams. So if you're trying to bridge that last gap towards the 1600 and you're interested in buying this textbook, feel free to use the link in the description. Next, the SAT is a slow exam. We all know that one kid in school who like finishes their exam or test before everyone else, and they just like slam their pencil on the desk, they like ruffle all their papers, make like as much noise as possible to like flex like, yo, hey, I finished my exam first, right? If you are actually the type of person to finish your SAT passage in half the allotted time and then just try to flex by just like taking a nap, you are slow in the head. How could that possibly be the best use of your time? And who are you trying to impress, bro? The baddie sitting behind you, bro, she didn't even know your name, dipshit. There are 2 things that you do when you have extra time on the SAT. Now, before we even get into that, when you're taking your official exam, you shouldn't just have this unexpected lump of time show up. You should be doing more than enough practice exams leading up to the actual test to where you have an expected pacing. You know about how fast you should be working through the problems and how much time will probably be left over for you at the end. Now with that time, here's what you do. If you're doing the reading or writing sections and you have more than 10 minutes remaining and you're doing a practice test and you notice this, what you need to do is start slowing down when you're going through each of the passages. The main difference between the reading writing sections and the math section is the fact that since these English sections are passage based, it's a lot harder to actually take extra time that you have and go back and try to answer difficult questions because the passage is no longer fresh in your mind. Now you have to take the time to read over the passage again, make sure that you're familiar with it, and then try to riddle out a difficult question, which is usually way harder later than actually during the test. So instead, you want to pace yourself to where you have more time and you can answer the questions in the moment. And by the time you get through the entire reading section, for instance, all the questions are done and answered. But with the extra, 5 minutes that you have left over, you can go back to just a handful of difficult questions and try to read the passage again and see if you can answer them out. However, for the math section, you want to think about this a little differently. You, of course, should start by going back after you finish the exam to the difficult starred questions. But once you finish those, realistically, right, if you've prepared enough to get an 800 on the math section, you are finishing the section quite quick. The SAT is really, really slow to the point where you probably have half the allotted time on like the no calculator section, for instance, to just go back and work. I honestly recommend that once everything is all said and done, you go back to the start and you just redo the math section. However, when you're redoing it, you do not look at the answer options. Your goal is not to look at the answer option and be like, oh yeah, that looks around correct. Your goal is to vet for mistakes, places that you overlooked or things that you just didn't notice. So by covering up the answers, not giving yourself any kind of influence or bias, and then answering it again, that's where you have the highest likelihood of being able to catch errors. There are also like test taking strategies where you work backwards through the exam, or you take your answer and you check, like put it back into the problem or the system and make sure it works. Look, it varies based on the type of problem, but I found that just going from the start to the end a second time is not only doable because you already know how to solve the problems, it shouldn't take that long, but it's the most effective at catching mistakes. You should be working until time is called on every single section. When you spend weeks to months preparing for an exam like this, you can't just be out here getting tired during the exam, saying, oh yeah, I think I'm gonna do a good enough job. If the good enough job costs you 30, 40 points, going from a 1570 to a 1530 or a 1530 to a 1490, that is detrimental in the scope of college admissions. You are literally dropping yourself from being in the upper quartile, the upper 25% of Harvard students, all the way down to average or below average with the score that you're earning. This is what you prepared for. You do not get tired now. Another thing that I found really helped me in preparation for the exam was giving myself an advantage psychologically. You see, when it comes to actually taking the SAT, on test day, you're going to feel nervous. Like, it's just part of the process. You're going to feel stressed. You've been preparing for this exam for a while, and you know that, to some degree, it actually does matter, right? So here's what we can do to try to minimize the actual stressors and keep yourself locked in on test day. One of the things that's very likely to actually be causing the stress within us is the fact that the SAT is unknown, right? There's so many different factors about it that you don't know. You don't know what kind of passages you're gonna get. You don't know what it's gonna be like test day. So why don't we do what we can to optimize the things that we can control, the things that we do know are going to happen? What I want you to do at least one time before taking your actual SAT exam is to do a dress rehearsal of the entire SAT examination day. You're gonna set your alarm clock for the same time that you plan on waking up during your actual SAT exam. Go to your kitchen, make yourself the same breakfast you're gonna eat on the test day, do your morning routine exactly like you would before you take the exam, and then go and sit for the exam. What's even better is if you actually change the location that you're going to do this practice test for the dress rehearsal to somewhere else in your house. What I did was I moved like a small table and bench into my room, and I just took it there. On top of that, I picked out the same snacks that I was gonna eat on the SAT exam day. I had like an idea in my mind of like, okay, I wanna go to the bathroom during this break and I just wanna like decompress and chill during this other break. Everything was scheduled out. Not only does this help improve your expectations of what the actual exam is going to be like, how you're gonna feel, any issues that come up along the way, but what it also does is give you a better sense of the little details, things you might have overlooked. Like, for example, when I used to do my SAT preparation, I do it on my desk at home, right? I have plenty of room to work with. I'd spread out all my papers neatly. I'd keep my calculator in one spot during the math section. I had everything planned out. When I moved to a different environment, I realized that during the actual SAT exam, we're not gonna have this ample table space like you probably do like in your kitchen or on your desk. You're on these little 2x2 slabs they give you in these public schools. You don't have room to just be mapping out all your papers. And so I had my own new strategy that I developed like right before the exam to make sure that everything was in alignment. You don't have to be this meticulous in your preparation, but just doing one dress rehearsal is going to reduce the overall stress levels of what it's going to be like on exam day. I want to see each and every one of you succeed on your SAT. If you use some tips from this video and they're actually useful, go ahead and just send me a DM. Like I will actually respond to you with like a congratulations, okay? I want to make sure that these things go well for you guys. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. This has been Pratik. Peace.